August is Women in Translation Month, and as I did last year, I would like to go over some translations by women authors, sometimes by women translators, that I think you should read. I know that there are a couple of books that float around on booktube that are commonly recommended for this sort of the month, right? Like Jacqueline Hartman's I Who Have Never Known Men, etc., Convenience Store Women by Sayaka Murata. But I want to call attention to some books that I don't think are always on people's radars. So without further ado, let's get into the video. The first book I will be discussing, I think you should read, is called The Nights Are Quiet in Tehran by Shida Bazyar. This is by an Iranian-German author. She is Iranian descent, but she is a German citizen, and so it was translated from German. This is a sort of multi-generational family story that follows two generations. It starts with the parents, who are Iranian socialists and help to bring down the Shah in the 1979 revolution, and then they have to flee when the Islamic Republic is born, and they take refuge in West Germany. So there are four different sections that follow the father, the mother, the son, and the daughter, and it corresponds to four different time periods in Iran's history, as well as what is happening at that time in Germany. I will discuss this book more in my July wrap-up. I thought the beginning was really strong, and then it kind of peters off. The father's POV was by far the most interesting, especially because I don't feel that the history and perspective of Iranian socialists and communists is really that well known or discussed. So I would recommend picking this one up. The next book is also by another Iranian author, but she is from Iran originally and she lived there for a significant period of her life. That is Women Without Men by Shahrnush Parsipur. This is a magical realism story that follows, I think there's about, I want to say 10, maybe 7 women that each are confined by this constraints of gender roles in 1950s Iran. And so they all somehow end up going to this magical garden on the outskirts of Tehran. And they all end up finding each other and living together in this sort of commune. But their journeys there end up being quite difficult, and every woman has a different story to tell. This book was originally, I think it was banned in Iran, and the author was imprisoned. It was published in 1988, and it honestly surprises me that this even got past the censors. The author no longer lives in Iran, and I think that her work had been under censorship for many times. She was imprisoned, I think, under both the Shah and then later on the Islamic Republic. So if you're into magical realism and kind of historical fiction with very strong feminist themes, I'd recommend checking this out. The next book was another July read I have yet to discuss, and that is Mona by Pola Oloixarac. This author is from Argentina, and it is a very short book that is essentially a satire on the literary world and self-important artists who all kind of circle jerk each other and their work and each other's work. And so our main character finds herself at this writer's prestigious literary award festival in Sweden, and she's interacting with all of the different writers there from different countries. Our main character is actually, I believe, from Peru, even though the author's from Argentina. And everyone is sort of like an over-the-top stereotype of their respective country. And then the end gets weird. Some shit goes down. There's also, she has a backstory too that's sort of woven into this tale. So that is Mona, and that is my one recommendation from a South American author. The next book I will be discussing is called Blood Feast by Malika Moustadraf. Malika Moustadraf was a Moroccan writer who I don't think really found recognition until after she passed away. She definitely had issues with the censors in her country because she also wrote very frank descriptions of women's personal lives and body autonomy. She also wrote about even transgender women and sex workers, domestic violence, things like that. This collection of short stories, I reviewed this, I think, in, I forget which wrap-up it was. It was either January or February. It was quite, the prose is quite sparse and bleak. And I think that some of these stories were really fleshed out. Others felt very like they needed a little more meat on their bones. But again, I think that might just be what I personally prefer when it comes to writing. So, but yeah, I would recommend checking her out because I don't think she really got her flowers until after she passed. The next book that is kind of similar in themes actually, but the author is from Mexico, is, I lied, I do have another, Central America, is Reservoir Bitches by Dahlia de la Cerda. So I just finished reviewing this for my June wrap-up. You can check that out here for a more in-depth review. It also deals with the violence that exists around women and women from all walks of life, women from different occupations, whether they are old seamstresses living in a shared housing situation or drug cartel daughters or politicians who lie about their roots. Also, she also features transgender characters as well, frank depictions of things like abortion. So, I mean, I thought this was okay, but I think if you are into reading about like the nitty-gritty of womanhood that isn't sugar-coated, then I would recommend you check it out. The next book is actually one that I own, and that is called The Piano Teacher by Elfriede Jelnik. This is a translation from Austrian, and I reviewed this book in one of my November wrap-ups last year. This is one of those books I feel like a lot of people will either love or hate. I kind of was in the middle with it. The writing is very, very almost academic and super wordy, and I don't know if that was a translator issue or that's actually what the original German was like. This is about a woman with severe mommy issues who was a former child piano prodigy who ended up just being a teacher, and she still is at home with her codependent, domineering mother. And she develops a fascination with a male student who he is not 18 though, he is like 26. And they enter into this very not great relationship. And at night, the main character trolls porn theaters in the seedy side of Vienna. I part of this was I hated this book because it's just so bleak, but I also can't really think of any other book like this. So if you're into that, you should check it out. And yes, it was made into a film in the early 2000s. The next half of this video will be reserved for translated books that I have yet to read. These are also by women authors. And the first I have here is a nonfiction, and that is called They Called Me a Lioness, A Palestinian Girl's Fight for Freedom by Ahed Tamini. Ahed Tamini was somewhat of a viral sensation, I want to say 8 or 9 years ago. She was a Palestinian teenager who was living in the West Bank, and she slapped an Israeli soldier who was terrorizing her community, and then she was imprisoned. And so this is her story. Apparently it's a very harrowing tale of life under the daily occupation and ethnic cleansing in Palestine. I have read so many Palestinian stories on this channel, and I do want to get to this. It's hard, honestly, to read, particularly because it's still happening in real life. But I think that her voice is very important. The next book I would like to read is called Capitalists Must Starve by Seolyeon Park. This is a translation from South Korea, and it is set in the Japanese occupied backdrop of Korea, speaking of occupation, which follows a woman who I guess is working class and I think a factory worker. And it says, it follows the unflinching narratives of Alias Grace and the sweeping historical vision of Pachinko, a feminist historical fiction novel that balances raw grit with unexpected tenderness and a defiant streak of dark humor. Last and final book is for Egypt, and that is Woman at Point Zero by Nawal el-Saadawi. I've heard of Nawal el-Saadawi before. I had seen interviews with her before she passed. She was a very well-known Egyptian feminist, and this work of hers is dated from 1975. It is about a woman who is a sex worker in Egypt who kills her pimp, and then she is imprisoned, and it tells the story of her life from the prison cell, from her village childhood to how she became a city prostitute. So I've realized that all three of these books I've yet to read all have a common theme of women being imprisoned and under occupation and defying the odds. So yes, those are the 9 books I would recommend you check out for Women in Translation Month. Let me know below if you have any recommendations, because I love to read translations and I do primarily read women authors, so I'm always up for adding more to my TBR. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.